If you were an up-and-coming horror nerd in the 80s whose teachers frowned upon the reading of Stephen King, you had three choices: R.L. Stine, Christopher Pike, or Alvin Schwartz's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Mine was a Scary Stories household. Stine's Goosebumps series certainly had its fans, but for a kid who started watching horror movies long before hitting puberty, Stine's work just wasn't visceral enough. Also, puppets aren't scary. Christopher Pike was monkeying around with dark subject matter with characters who were slightly older and indeed hornier, but still, were Pike's novels actually nightmare-inducing? Not quite. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, though? Oh boy, these books were so scary, so disturbing, and so weird that they ended up getting banned by a bunch of school libraries.
Teachers will vote next week on a plan to ban 3 books from an elementary school library.
To borrow an old line from Will Smith,
parents just don't understand.
The attraction of Scary Stories was twofold. You had Stephen Gamble's horrifying artwork, which did not shy away from being absolutely grotesque. I mean, just look at this stuff. But then there were the stories themselves, carefully researched folktales which had been repackaged via simple, ominous writing that just about any kid could wrap their head around. That research Schwartz had done lent these stories, as succinctly told as they were, with a palpable feeling of history. To read these stories was to imagine them being croaked out next to a campfire by a skeletal old crone in the dead of night. Some Scary Stories were indeed scarier than others. So let's talk about the top 3 scariest Scary Stories. Coming in at number 3, we've got Is Something Wrong from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark 3. The story concerns a young man whose car breaks down in the middle of nowhere. Remembering an empty house he passed a little ways up the road, the guy heads back to the house, builds a fire, crashes out for the night, and wakes up in the morning facing down an unspeakable monster that suddenly drops down the chimney. So the guy does what any of us would do in this situation. He jumps out a window and runs like hell. He runs and runs until he can't run anymore, and just when he thinks he's in the clear, he feels a tap on his shoulder. Turning around, he comes face to face with... So, yeah, the story's nothing new, but can you imagine getting tapped on the shoulder by this monstrosity? I locked my bedroom door and slept under 3 blankets after this one, which, by the way, laugh at that strategy all you want, but that floating skull monster never got me. Coming in hot at number 2 is The Haunted House, from the original Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This is a story any child would love. A preacher hears about a haunted house, so he camps out there for the night, hoping to get rid of whatever evil spirit might be haunting the joint. After a while, he hears something moving around in the basement, then a struggle, and then someone getting strangled to death. There's more to this story, but I just want to remind everyone, I picked this book up at a school-sponsored book fair when I was like 7 years old. That's how it was back in the 80s.
When I was your age, television was called books.
The preacher does what he came to do. He starts reading from the Bible and demanding that the malevolent spirit present itself, which it does. By the way, this is what the ghost looks like. Wow. Totally cool. I see no issue with this. Why would any parent not want their children to read this book? Wow. And finally, number 1, we have Wonderful Sausage. You read that title, and right from the get-go, you knew you were in trouble. Wonderful Sausage appears in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark Volume 2, and concerns a butcher named Sam who murders his wife and turns her body into, you guessed it, sausage. Turns out, Sam's new sausage is a hit. His customers love it. But eventually his supply runs out, and you know what that means. Time to find new meat.
What are Ted and Janie made of?
They are good, aren't they? And a wonderful source of B vitamins.
Sam turns one person after another into sausage for years, until one day, one of his victims, a young boy, manages to escape before being fed into the grinder. Sam chases him into the street with a butcher knife, and it's only then that the townspeople realize where all those missing persons have gone. What happens next? Even the story doesn't know. Maybe Sam got fed to his hogs. Maybe he went into the grinder. It doesn't matter because the story ends with this illustration. Are you kidding me with this? Do you have any idea how traumatizing this was at like 8 years old? In fact, now that we're talking about it, I'm almost certain that Wonderful Sausage is directly responsible for my lifelong aversion to processed meats. And if I'm ever able to prove that conclusively, Alvin Schwartz will be receiving a letter from my lawyer.
Okay.
The good news is, all this terrifying artwork has been perfectly replicated by Andre Overdahl, Guillermo del Toro, and the rest of the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark team. The collections are still readily available wherever books are sold, and now we're getting an entire movie that brings them to horrifying life. Do you know what that means? It means that an entire new generation, some of whom may be sitting in this very audience right now, will be given the opportunity to be utterly scandalized by these terrifying designs. Hooray for Hollywood indeed.